deals with the paranormal, or rather, I should say, it deals with psychic mediums who claim they can talk to the dead and things of that nature. Um, and I was asked why I did this. Years ago, my wife was getting a massage in a building in downtown Minneapolis, and she saw a tray levitate off of the table, fly across the room, and hit the wall. Now, she found this very disconcerting, and she asked the masseuse, the person, did you see that? And the masseuse blew it off and said, well, that sort of thing happens all the time. Ghosts are knocking down things and moving chairs and stuff like this. Now, to that moment, my wife had never considered this thing. She never was into ghosts or paranormal or anything like this. She comes home and she tells me the story. I didn't believe her. I mean, I believed her, but I'm like, well, there has to be an explanation. Somebody must be pranking you or something like this. Well, this got her interested. Now, I tell you this story, even though I know half of you will not believe it under any circumstances. I did the research. And the other half will believe it. But the half that will believe it because they've had things like this happen to them. They all have a story to tell. The people who don't believe it don't have a story to tell or refuse to accept the story they have. They have to believe that something else explained all of this. Anyway, so Renee got involved in this stuff. She started doing research because this is the way her mind works. And she got involved with paranormal investigators. And she took a class from a psychic medium and all of this sort of thing. And when we traveled, and we traveled a great deal at the time before the pandemic, we never stayed at a 4-star hotel unless it was 100 years old and supposed to be haunted. Because Renee is on a mission. She wants to have another encounter. She wants to find another ghost. She wants to see this again, if for no other reason than to reinforce what she already went through and what she's been learning. So she had all this, and I went with her, of course. So she had all this information. And so I just one day I looked at it and I said, I bet there's a story in here somewhere. And so I did some research of my own, and that's where the book came from. The conceit of the book is that a psychic medium, who, by the way, is auditioning for a TV show, claims that this guy that Mackenzie killed 20 years earlier will disclose the location of this cash that he stole that has never been recovered if somebody shoots Mackenzie. Of course, Mackenzie finds this very disconcerting. And the story isn't really, is there such thing as ghosts? So there's a lot of that in there, but it's about the whole industry. It's a $2.2 billion industry. And can people communicate with the dead? Do the dead walk among us? Can things be influenced by the dead? Is it all a scam? Is some real and some not real? And all that kind of all works its way through the book as Mackenzie tries to figure out what's going on. Just thought you ought to know. And as Alicia said, anybody got any questions, you feel free to throw those out. I've always been asked, do I believe in ghosts? I do now. I didn't. I mean, even where we're doing all this stuff, even I'm going on ghost tours in Edinburgh, for God's sake, I'm still like, but a couple of things have happened. I have a couple of stories. And because of that, yeah, I do believe. Is it as prevalent as the TV shows you see on Discovery claim it is? Can mediums really talk to the dead? And there's a line in the book where a woman who's involved in this industry says, I do believe that the dead walk among us. I do believe that there are some psychic mediums who can talk to them all the time, and some who can talk to them most of the time, and some who can talk to them some of the time, and some who can't talk to them at all. But they all have a product to sell. And that basically is the crux of the book and what I'm trying to explore as we go through the story. That's about it. That's all I got for you on From the Grave. Except it was nominated for a Minnesota Book Award, so good for me. Donna, were you going to say something? Oh, I thought you were, your screen lit up for a second. I thought I was going to get a question.
David?
Yes.
What were your experiences that led you to now believe? Because I've had a number of them myself.
Well, there were a couple of incidents that taken by themselves, you blow off. We had a cat. The cat died. And we actually had to, the cat taken away and all that. And one day I'm sitting there and I'm working and I feel the cat rubbing up against my leg, which my cat did all the time when I'm at my desk. And without even thinking about it, I'm writing and I reach down to pet it. And of course it's not there. And then you think, well, it's your imagination, that sort of thing, except the exact same thing happened to my wife. And then she does some research and finds out this is not unusual. Pets like to say goodbye. Then there was the woman, Marianne Wiskowski. I'm probably mispronouncing her name. She was the woman that the character that Jennifer Love Hewitt played in the TV series The Ghost Whisperer is based on. My wife was doing a remote thing with her, and she told Renee that there was a guy in my house, a dead guy in my house just hanging around who didn't have much to say. And they decided that this was my father. And I'm like, yeah, the old man wasn't a guy to hang around, that sort of thing. But then she told me he said something to her that she repeated that made me just go, what? A lot of these guys, they'll do readings, especially hard readings where you're going to somebody's house as opposed to a mass reading where you got 100 people in an auditorium. And the fakes will do deep dives into your history. And when I say a deep dive, I don't mean that they look up your Facebook page and they find out that you wrote a book in 1914 or 2014. They'll look and they'll go through it and they'll find, oh, there's a picture. And there's 15 guys all wearing bow ties taken at a funeral of so-and-so. And then they'll come back to you and they'll go, you know what, you're what was it? Was it your grandfather, your father? He liked bow ties. And somebody will go, oh my God, yeah, my father loved bow ties. How would you know that? You can't know that. Well, if you're an investigator and you do the stuff that my characters do in the books, which I can do because that's how I can write about it, you find these little tidbits and you bring them up and you can't imagine how they would know this, all right? But this medium who said my father was hanging around the house waiting for my mother to pass, who passed on Christmas Eve, by the way, and apparently they both went to the light, I guess. told my father said something that nobody knew. And I mean nobody, because he only told me. And what he told me was he didn't like my books. He didn't like those kinds of stories. Now, he told me this like 18 years ago when I'm on like number 5. All right. And he didn't tell anybody else. He didn't, and I didn't tell anybody. Now, you get a psychic medium and whose father, who's doing this reading, and the guy's father is there. Wouldn't she say something? Oh, your father loved your books. Why would they say I didn't? You get what I mean? And that's what made me go, okay, these tiny little incidents that happened and this moment happened, and that added up to me believing, oh, okay. Now I got to tell you, that happened after I wrote the book. That didn't make me go, oh, I got to write this story. That happened afterwards, a good 6-7 months afterwards. So I'm like, now again, I tell you that, and I know half the people who will hear me won't believe it. They'll think I'm nuts. They think I'm making it up. They think I'm selling a book. And that's it. That's one of the reasons that people don't believe it, is because it is a big industry, and because there are books to be sold and shows to be watched and readings to go to. And you get guys, people like, oh, what the hell is her name? The woman from New York. Went right out of my head. And they'll do these mass readings at casinos. And if you go to these and you listen to them, more often than not, you're going to come away going, come on. Because I did. But again, I think some people can do it. They do it all the time. And the others, maybe they have smaller gifts and they're trying to, profit from it. But that's where I'm at right now. I'm going, okay, I'll believe this. I don't think that they're trying to burn down your house or drag you to hell or do any of the stuff that you get in the movies and TV shows, but I'm accepting. Okay, I believe this. And you mind? I got another book coming out. We can talk about that too.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you talked about, I had to go for just a minute or two. Do your books come from personal experiences? Is that what kind of drives you to write these? I always wonder about that.
Well, they come from, yeah, they come from things I come across or I see or I hear or I put in my, pocket and then later on I have a story and I'll think about, hey, what if this happened or what if that happened? I'm trying to think of a good example. The book that's coming out in May, What Doesn't Kill Us. The idea kind of sort of came from my brother-in-law. We were up at, my wife's family has a place in northwestern Wisconsin. We were up there messing around with the fire pit. And he said, you know what you got to do? You got to do a story about DNA. You got to do a story about these people that are always looking for their ancestors and they find out their sister really isn't their sister and their mother really, that kind of stuff. And most of the people who tell me these things, who give me ideas, I go, oh, thank you. And then I'm like, come on. So I ignored it. Then I had a idea of a kind of a guy named Dorsey who invented Twitter. Him and his partner built Twitter. Announced that he was going to move to Africa. And Twitter stock dropped 7%. Boom. Why would it drop 7%? Because this guy's going to Africa. Well, it went back up because people sat there and said, well, what difference does it make where the guy's from? but you get guys like Gates before and the guy who invented Apple. Somebody tell me. Anyway, you get these guys who are so closely tied to their products, like Elon Musk, that anything happens to them and it affects their business. When Bezos and his wife divorced, Amazon stock went up because they knew there would be a stock split. He knew that this woman was going to take about $30 billion out of the business. You know, you buy the dips, right? And so all this happened. And I've started to think about it. So, okay, what if somebody kind of sort of engineered that? And how would you find out? Well, what if a guy decided to get his DNA tested and discovered that he was related to one of these guys, one of these Silicon Valley giants. And this Silicon Valley giant disappeared. Well, that's not what happened in the book, but that's how the process works. You get one idea and then you get another idea and you sit back and go, hey, wait a minute. Years ago, I read a piece on National Geographic about the depopulation of the Great Plains states and how all of these places, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, they're losing population like crazy because all these small towns really no longer have a reason to exist. And because they're so far away from any kind of industrial hub, they're literally dying. They're drying up and blowing away. And I kept that in my pocket for years. And then I'm playing hockey with this guy who is, by the way, a financial guy who's got an office in Minneapolis and Seattle, him and his partner. And he talked about how his high school closed. He was from South Dakota. And that prompted me to go, hey, what if, you know, I decided I wanted to write about that. And now I'm trying to think of what kind of story can I tell that would let me get into that? You know, how would I get my character, my protagonist into this place? And why would he be there? Why would he be involved? And that's how it works. You just get an idea, a thread, and you keep pulling at it and you keep putzing with it. And sometimes it takes years before the story comes to you, but that's how you do it. And more often than not, the idea for the book never appears in the book. I mean, you move on from that. And all of a sudden you go, oh, how about this instead? And then the original stuff goes away. And, you know, why did you write this? Well, because there was this girl who fell off of a bar stool in northern Minnesota. And I thought, what if she fell off the back of a truck? And what if the truck was moving? And what if it was a blizzard? And what if she didn't fall, she was pushed? And then you just go on, and the girl in the bar disappears. I mean, you never get to her again, but that's how it happens. You go, wait, what if? That's my way my mind thinks. I'll be having dinner. I'll be at a party. I'll be having dinner with my friends. I'll be having a beverage after a hockey game with my guys. And all of a sudden I'll go, I'll get an idea and I will just zone out. And then I'll come back in 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes later, whatever time it was. And I'm like, what were we talking about? That drives my family nuts. Renee just goes, she just raps on the table. Hey. I used to date a girl who would take my watch. We'd go out and first thing she'd do is give me your watch. Because whenever I started doing that, I would putz with my watch. I would go like this. Well, you can't see it, but I would be going, And she figured if I took away the watch, I would do that, realize my watch wasn't there, and go, oh, I better cut it out and come back to her. this is probably way, way too much information than you guys need, but it's a quiet room, you know? I mean, I see you, but I can't hear you. So I don't hear anybody going, which tells me to move on to something else. Chris should wave at me and say, "Move, go on, Dave, go on." Dave."
Well, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your main characters and how you developed them, or how, you know, they became real people in our minds.
Well, Holland Taylor, my original character, he was a traditional trench coat detective. He's straight out of Chandler and Hammett and McDonald. And the reason I wrote him that way was because at that time you saw an influx in the industry of non-traditional detectives. Patricia Cornwall had just pretty much reinvented the forensic pathologist as a hero. CSI and all that came because of her. And you had all these other offbeat characters, or you had characters who were haunted in one fashion or another. And growing up, you can't see it, but I got a huge wall here of crime novels. I read these books, and this is what I liked. And so when I was going to create the character, I wanted to write that character. I wanted to write the guy, who came out, Travis McGee coming out of the 60s, and Parker, and all these traditional guys, as opposed to the new guys. And that's pretty much where it came from. And the humanity, that was just developed as you wrote. You're trying to write about a real human being. And this is what happened. Now, I brought him back for several books later, but after my third book, what happened was my publishing house, which was in Connecticut, was bought by W.W. Norton. Now, W.W. Norton didn't buy it to get me. They bought it to get the hiking books and cooking books and all their outdoor stuff. Foul Play Press was basically a small imprint. Countryman Press, which was the owner of Foul Play Press, they only published English writers. They would get the US rights to English novelists. I was their only American. So when W.W. Norton bought the company, I was screwed. And I knew it. I knew it because a publicist called asking to speak to Steve Housewright. And my wife said, I have a cousin named Steve. And she goes, well, who's calling? And she identified herself. And my wife said, are you sure you're not calling to talk to David Housewright, the Edgar Award-winning mystery writer? And the publicist said, no, I'm pretty sure his name is Steve. So I'm doomed, and I know it. They published out the contract, and then they basically didn't know who I was. So now we're coming up with a new, we tried to shop around the series, and we got a lot of interest, but back in those days, this is before ebooks. This is before, Amazon and all that. And so they couldn't control the back sales of these books. Berkeley did the paperbacks, for example. And so no new publisher wanted that because they would have, all this baggage. So we had to create a new character, and we created Mackenzie because of Dennis Lehane, who I know personally, who is just the best guy in the world. He's just a great guy. But if you read his books, especially his detective books, his Kinsey books, they're always so emotional. And you get to the end of those books and you never go, wow, that was great. You always go, oh God, that's over with. Because they were so emotional, and you were like a wrung out wash rag when you got to the end of these books. And by the way, I highly recommend Dennis Lehane, great writer. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something else. I was going back again to those original guys. I wanted my endings to be not, if not uplifting, at least I wanted to give the readers closure. I wanted them to smile when they closed the book. So I went through this period where I'm trying to think of the character. And I remember an old TV series called Burke's Law, which starred Gene Barry. And he played Amos Burke, who was the captain in charge of the homicide unit at the Los Angeles Police Department. And what made him unique was that he was filthy, stinking rich. And he would go to crime scenes in a Rolls Royce. And you would watch these shows and they always began with the villain. They always began with the crime. And then they would cut and there would be Gene Barry in a tuxedo dancing with a beautiful woman on a dance floor, or in a tuxedo at a dinner or something like this. And then a butler or somebody would come up to him with a telephone. Call for you, sir. And he would pick up the phone and then the music would begin. You know? And I love that. And again, Kinsey, you know, and Dennis Lehane, his characters all had issues. And I thought, how about a guy who does it because he wants to make a world a better place? Now that means he can't be a cop. I mean, he can be a cop, but he's, you know, it's a detective story, not a police procedural. And what if he, you know, he's got money, so he's not doing it as a job. He's doing it as a, or not even really a hobby, but he's doing it because this is his mantra in life is to live well and be useful. And so he does favors for friends. And he doesn't have to worry about the money, and he can, that way I have the freedom to go anywhere, do anything. And that's where it came from. It was from that idea of being this uplifting guy. So no matter what terrible, terrible things happened in the books, some of which he does himself, when his head hits the pillow, he sleeps soundly at night because he actually believes he's made the world a little bit better place by stepping up and doing whatever needs to be done. And that's where the character came from. And the humanity and you know, he's a baseball fanatic and he loves jazz, and I don't know where that came from. Chris knows. You know, that's just because that's my life. That's my background. He's in Minnesota because I'm from Minnesota. This is my ground. If he was from Wisconsin, he would, you know, if I was from Wisconsin, Mackenzie would be in Wisconsin. He wouldn't be nearly as interesting, but he would be from Wisconsin. And that's how I look at it. And that's where the story came from. That's way, way long answer for a simple question. But help me out, you guys. Help me out. DS, Sean.
I want to say, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to say I love Author Talks, and you are one of the best speakers that I've heard because you make it kind of fun too, interesting and fun. So thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you. I appreciate it.
And your books are absolutely wonderful.
I'm not sure my kids would agree with you.
Tell them to call me.
They've heard a lot of my stories, so it's
Yeah.
my son basically takes credit for my career because okay, I can tell you a story. The titles for my books come out of the books. Almost never do I have a title when I start writing. It usually appears as I go along. In some cases, I don't even have a title when the book is finished, and we have to figure it out. That's what happened to Tin City. I never liked any of the titles I came up with, and my publisher didn't care for them either. And we thought, okay, I'll tell you what, we'll take the weekend, we'll talk on Monday, and we'll decide what to call it then. Well, that weekend I was doing a signing, and a guy asked me what I was working on. I told him, well, I'm working on a book where most of the action takes place in a mobile home park. And the guy goes, oh yeah, I had a brother-in-law who used to live in one of them Tin Cities. Tin City, that's the title of the book. Okay. The one exception, I wrote a book called Highway 61, and nobody in my family liked the title of this book. I don't know why not, but they didn't. And my son said, you know what you should call it? You should call it The Manicore Connection, Curse of the Jade Lily. And I'm like, what the hell is a manicore? It doesn't matter. Well, yes, it does. It doesn't matter. There's no jade lily. It doesn't matter. And I go, yes, these things matter. And he goes, no. And he takes me to these websites. And the website had to do with a lot of games, you know, Call of Duty 12, something, something. And you look at John Stanford's, all these Prey books. None of those titles are specific to that book. They're specific to the whole range of the books. So he's telling me this, and I'm halfway listening to him. Anyway, I finished the book. Back in those days, you were still mailing manuscripts instead of doing electronically. So I send it off to my publisher, and I send an email to my publisher, and I said, the book is on its way. It is under the original title, Highway 61. He sends me back an email saying they love the title Highway 61. He can't wait until you read the book. And then I made a mistake. I sent him one email too many. And in the next email, I said, well, I'm glad you like it. Otherwise, my next book will be called Curse of the Jade Lily. He called me on the phone. I talk to my publisher once a year over drinks at some conference or something. We never talk on the phone. I haven't even talked to my agent in 10 years. It's all, you know, emails and stuff. So he calls me. And right away, I'm thinking, oh my God, something's wrong. You know, the book blew up in the mail. I don't know. So I'm like, you know, anxious. What? And he said, oh, we love the title Curse of the Jade Lily. It is so S.S. Van Dyne. We can't wait to read this book. S.S. Van Dyne, by the way, was the guy who wrote the Philo Vance novels. All right. So I'm going, yeah. You know, it's going to be great. Hang up the phone. Son of a bitch. It took me 2.5 months just to figure out what the damn Jade Lily was. You know, originally it was going to be a ship that sank in Lake Superior, but my buddy Nevada Bar did that already. And then it was going to be a mine, a copper mine in the Upper Peninsula. And then it was going to be a bar. And then it was going to be a stripper. And then one day I read in the Economist a story about this guy. He was a British serving officer who got himself killed in World War I. But before he died, he got his hands on a jade buffalo that he wrapped up and put in the family vault. And there it stood for like 80 years until his great-granddaughter was going through all of the estate for her grandmother, who wanted to give everything out before she died instead of waiting until afterwards. And they came across this package, and in it was the jade buffalo, which they sold at auction at Sotheby's for or 4.4 million pounds. At the time, that's $6.5 million in real money. And then I go, well, now I know what the jade lily is. It's a lily made out of jade. And the book won the Minnesota Book Award. It did very well. It was one of my better selling novels. And now my son is like, see? My son, the economist, he goes, yeah. Now you got to call a book Manicore Connection. I said, no. He said, you got to do it. So one day I'm having drinks with my my editor in New Orleans. And I said, okay, how about this for the next book? The Manicore Connection. And he looks at me and he picks up his drink. He takes a sip, thinks about it, sets it down. No. My son decided, you should get a new publisher. St. Martin's is just not doing it for you. How many books? 15. They haven't even called one of them a Manicore Connection. Another long answer to a simple question.
Okay, David, I have a question for you. This is Sean.
Yes, sir.
So I just finished, I don't know, it was set up in Grand Marais. The
Dead
Mistress,
Man's Mistress.
yes. And so kind of a John Sanford fan, to say just and I enjoy all the landmarks that he references in his books in St. Paul, having gone to St. Thomas. So having been to Grand Marais, and you hit all these landmark places in small Grand Marais and so forth, that garnered my attention. So now I'm reading the latest one about that you were just talking about earlier here, about the ghost.
From the grave?
Yes.
Okay.
So do all of your novels that you've written, you reside in St. Paul, are they all set initially in St. Paul as the setting of your novels? Mostly, or not necessarily?
Mostly it's the greater Twin Cities area, but I go outside. I told you before that my wife and I like to travel. We used to do, we would do like weekends in Sauk Center. And Renee would always turn these trips into hobbies where she would learn everything there is about the place, and the historical society, and places you got to go, and the restaurants you got to eat at, and all that stuff. And it's not like we had an itinerary, but we never just stood there and go, oh, what should we do? I mean, we got to do this, we got to do that. So she does all the research. I got to use it, right? And that way I can write off my trips and my taxes. I write mostly about the Twin Cities because this is Mackenzie's ground, but I go to Duluth, I'll go to Grand Marais, I'll go to Pipestone, I'll go to wherever. Sometimes, like in the book I'm writing now, I have to invent a city. Just like I did one, I had to invent the city and the taking of Libby, South Dakota, which was about the depopulation of Great Plains states. Because I needed a place that had certain elements that an existing city doesn't have. But I try to use as much real location as I can. And the reason is because I'm a big believer in location, in setting, in helping to inform the book. There's an old saying, if you're from where they're from and you're taught what they're taught, you'll believe what they believe. So if you can evoke a setting where you can give people a real sense of the place, then I think that goes a long way into telling the reader who these people are and why they behave the way they do. And that becomes the the goal. Now you read a book taking place in the Twin Cities. Uh, uh, to pick The Devil May Care. Much of that book takes place on Lake Minnetonka in that community. And the people, and then you read Like to Die, which takes place, or no, Dead Man's Mistress, which takes place mostly in Grand Marais and Grand Portage and Thunder Bay, Ontario, in basically that area along the North Shore. The characters in those books don't behave the way the characters do on Lake Minnetonka. They don't think the same. At least I hope they don't, because that's the goal, is to give people a sense of who these guys are in where you're at. The characters you write about in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis, on the north side of Minneapolis, are not the same characters in Deer Lake, Minnesota, in Unidentified Woman number 15. You see what I mean? And I think if you can do that, if you can really do that, give people a real sense of it, it goes a long way to informing the book. It goes a long way to explaining why people do the things they do. And anyway, that's what I strive for. And I hope I get it. It isn't just about listing landmarks that people, so people can go, oh, I've been there, or I drove by there, that kind of thing.
Well, that might be a good reinforcer for students that I've had in English class. When you ask them, would you rather go to the movie or read the book? And of course, being high school students, they'd rather go to the movie. But the smart ones, they'd rather read the book so they can picture in their own mind the characters, the setting, the plot. It all comes to life. And in your books, that's what happens.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you're saying that. I think that's why a lot of readers don't like the movies made out of their favorite books. I remember my wife was very upset when Tom Cruise played Lestat, the vampire in Diary of a Vampire. Tom Cruise is not Lestat. Daniel Day-Lewis is Lestat. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But that's the thing. You see the characters. And I've done this myself. Maybe you guys can tell me if you've done it, where I will have a description given to me of a character in a book, but I'll change it. In my mind, I'll see somebody else. I'll ignore that description. And Donna's nodding her head, so I'm going, okay, that's at least one. All of my books, not all of them, but most of them are audio books, and pretty soon they'll finish the Mackenzie series. I think I got like 4 or 5 more books to come out. Then all my books will be on audio. I can't listen to those. I can't listen to them for more than 30 seconds. I'm not kidding. And they're really well done. The guy, Brent Hinckley, who's doing the Mackenzie books, huge character actor, been around 1,000 years. You don't know his name, but if you've seen him, you would recognize him. Okay. And people keep telling me what a terrific job he's doing, and it's just great and it's perfect and all. Yeah. And I can't not listen to it, because as soon as I hear his voice, my head goes, that's not it. That's not him. That's not the voice I hear in my head when I'm putting it down on paper. So I have a hard time with that. We've been talking to some guys about turning Mackenzie into a TV series. And we actually talked about different actors playing the part. And I'm like, no. I mean, I'll accept anybody, but at the time I'm going,
Not that one.
well, the thing of it is, I have a picture in my head for all of the characters. I know who Shelby Dunstan is. I met her. She's a junior account executive for an ad agency I used to do some freelance work for. And when I put her on the paper, that's who I see. I know who Nina is. I went to college with her. I know who Heavenly Petrick is. I went to college with her. You see what I mean? I see the characters and I don't necessarily describe them. In fact, I try not to describe my characters too much, except to give enough to anchor them in your minds. I'm not going to give full-blown descriptions. I did earlier when I first starting out, but not now. Anyway, but I have a picture in my head of who the character looks like. And if it doesn't match the character that you see, well, that's fine with me. That's cool. I do not and have never had a picture in my head of what Mackenzie looks like. Never. I know he's tall. I know he's about 6 feet. That's it. That's really all I've got. I've never described him. And the reason I've never described him is because the books are written in first person. He's going to describe himself. He's going to say, now, let me tell you what I look like. Who does that? Nobody does that. And because he's never done it, I've never done it. I honestly, even now at this moment, could not tell you what he looks like. My daughter will say he looks like me. No, no, he's not nearly tall enough. And I don't think he's quite as good looking, to be honest, but that's the key. So, yeah.
Great.
Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? I know I've heard you on panels and you had talked about some of your, the way that you write and when you get up and maybe it's changed since I've heard you. It's been several years, but yeah.
Well, the process changes as we go along. When I first started out, I outlined everything. And the reason was because I was working in advertising at the time. I owned my own advertising agency. And writing time was at a premium. I mean, I would put in 60-hour weeks sometimes. And, you know, working with my partner and all these other people. So when I did have time to write, I didn't want to waste any of it by staring at the screen going, what the hell was I thinking? Because I had it worked out, I always knew. And if I was in chapter 3 and it wasn't quite working, I could skip up to another scene. I didn't actually have it broken up in chapters, but if I was here in this scene and you know, I knew needed to do something else, maybe I'd go to a different scene and write that and then come back to it later. I always knew because time was at a premium, I always knew by outlining what I had to research. I had to meet an emergency room nurse to explain this to me. I had to meet a paramedic, talk to a paramedic, explain it to me. And that way I would marshal my time. After we dissolved the ad agency, my partner folded into another shop and I started writing full time. The outlines became much less rigid and much less detailed, but they were still there. And they still exist that way. I always try to figure it out a little bit before I begin. I always know what the book is about. And the book has got to be about more than what happens in the book. I mean, there's got to be something to say. There's got to be a reason you're telling the story. And I figured that out first, like the depopulation, I mentioned that before, of the Great Plains states and what that does to people. Their whole families lived here for 100 years. And now you're going to move because for practical purposes, there's no reason for this place to exist anymore. What does that do to people? How does that change them? How does that mess with their heads a little bit? You're from one place, but you live there. So I'll say that to myself. Okay, I'm going to write about the paranormal. Now, From the Grave isn't really about the paranormal. It's not about ghosts. It's about belief. It's about faith. It's about why you believe the things you do. And against arguments and all this sort of thing. And then once I get that in my head, I have to have the ending. I got to know how the book ends. partly because it helps explain what the book is about to the reader, partly because it helps explain what the book is about to me, but mostly so you can funnel all the action to this conclusion. I think the ending of a book is just the single most important thing. I mean, nobody's ever gone to any of you and said, hey, you got to read this book. It's got a really good beginning. You know? I mean, a really great ending will save a bad book. A bad ending will kill the greatest book ever written up until that point, you know? So I figured that out. And then I'll start working, and I'll start writing, and I'll start slow. I'll write for, I'll write for an hour today and noodle and think and do this stuff. And then tomorrow, an hour and a half. And then towards the end, when I'm getting close to the end of the book, I'll sit down, I'll start writing. All of a sudden it's 9 o'clock at night and I'm going, Jesus, shouldn't somebody have fed me? You know, because that's the way I work. That's how I get involved. But everybody has their own way of doing things. Some people, they write so many words a week. I try to get so many words a week, and sometimes I actually do it. I know some people, they insist on writing so many words a day. I'm going to write 1,500 words today, no matter how long it takes. Some people will write between like 8 o'clock and 2 in the morning or whatever. Everybody has their own little system, and any system that gets you to finish the book is a good system. You know, I don't recommend or not recommend anything. Whatever works for you is a good thing. But yeah, that's kind of my process as I go along. I know guys like Steve Thayer who told me that the hardest thing he does every day is sitting down and writing. He's always looking for excuses not to write. He hates to write. He loves the research. He loves working out the book. And I guess he's an outliner too, but even much more so. He loves to figure it out, but he hates to actually sit down and physically write. I like it. I enjoy the process. I think that's fun. So what I'll do when I get up in the morning is I'll try to clear my day. I'll take care, I'll go off grocery shopping at 8 in the morning so I can do all the things I need to do so that when I can sit down and I can work and not have to go, oh my God, I got to make dinner. Oh my God, I got to do this or whatever. So I can just keep working until, the brain cells freeze up. Sometimes that takes very short period of time, but sometimes it takes much longer, and that's, you don't want to be interrupted if you can avoid it. Everybody has a process. I did a thing of some kind of gala for the Ramsey County Public Libraries with Kent Kruger, good guy. And Carrie Miller from NPR was there, and she's asking us, what's the difference between Kent and I and all these people who want to write books? And I answered, we will finish the novel. Most of them will not. Most people will find reasons not to finish the book. The job's a hassle. There's trouble in the marriage. My kid is sick. Baseball doesn't watch itself. I mean, you'll find reasons not to do it. And Kent and Kruger and I will, and Chris will find a way to write the book. The day my father died, I wrote 3 pages. They sucked, but I wrote 3 pages because that's the system. That's what you got to do. And, so again, whatever works, whatever keeps you at it until the book is finished, that's a good system. Kruger tell you about the time he got thrown out? Okay, I'm going to tell you another story. Because I don't get out much anymore, people. I'm staying at home in my office, staring at the windows as snow falls. Come on. Anyway, Kruger he used to write he still writes in longhand on college notebooks. And what he would do is he'd get up an hour and a half early and he'd go to the St. Clair broiler and he'd get a cup of Joe and he sits there and he writes for an hour and a half on these notebooks. And then he'd leave, get on the bus, take the bus up Snelling to, I think he was working at the university at the time. And this is what he did. And things went really well for Kent. And he retired from his job and now he's writing full time. He's going to write at home and he can't do it. He cannot do it. Because this is how he taught himself to write a book. And now all of a sudden he can't do it differently. So he would start doing it again. He would go to the St. Clair broiler early in the morning and he would write in longhand. That's how he did it. Well, the St. Clair broiler got sold. And the guys who bought it, they weren't reserved. That's another thing. He always sat in the same booth number 5, I think it was. And he'd get a cup of coffee. And I remember having trouble with one of my books. So I went to booth number 5. Didn't do me any damn good at all. But this is what he did. And then now he gets new ownership. And the other people loved him because he actually brought customers in, because this was like an origin story when he talked, we did interviews. So people would come to the St. Clair broiler. So they would reserve booth number 5 and they would give them free coffee. Now they got new ownership. They're not reserving the booth. They're not giving them free anything. And then the place closed down. So now Kruger's like, what the hell? So apparently there's a couple of coffee houses that he goes to. And he'll sit and he'll drink coffee and he'll write in longhand. And I told him once that I was going to go to the coffee house and shout, "That's William Kent Kruger," just to mess with him. But he knows that's not going to happen because it would require me getting up early in the morning and going someplace. And not even for a good joke am I doing that. But that's how he does it. And everybody has their system, like I said. So that's the other thing. If you're going to write a book, be careful how you teach yourself to do it, because you're probably going to get stuck with that. You're going to be, writing the same way all the time. Muscle memory. So what else do you want to know? That's it. We're done. Actually, it's getting late. I have been, yes.
Question. Have you ever changed your ending?
Yes.
You're writing, and then the ending didn't fit because you said you like to have the ending as you're writing.
Yes, I have.
Okay. Awesome.
Well, my outlines are very, I like to think of them as living documents. And they will change and they will meander, and I'll get an idea and I'll say, hey, this works better. Or, hey, what if I do that? Now, the good thing about it is you take your hunch and you run with it, and then you realize, geez, that sucks. Whose idea was that? But you can always go back to where to the part on the railroad tracks where you veered off and then move forward. Because I have an ending in mind. If my new ending doesn't work, go back to the old ending. So that it's almost like a fail-safe system. But I've done that many times where I changed the ending, where I have an idea in the course of the book to do this or do that, or even change who was the guilty party, just because of the process brought me to a place I didn't think of when I was just first working it out. You got to be flexible. I know people who hate, they don't like doing outlines, and they seem to be demeaning towards those of us who do. And they claim that, you got to be able to surprise yourself. How can you surprise the reader if you can't surprise yourself, and so on and so forth. And my answer to that is, opinions differ. I mean, whatever works for you is fine, but That's your system. This is mine.
Well, apparently you have a very good system because you have written some wonderful books and a lot of people love them. So keep
Well,
doing what
thank
you're
you, but
doing.
I always wonder when that's it. I have a bad habit where that's it. I'm done with a book and I'm like, I'm done. I got nothing more to say. I got no more stories to tell. And I'll wander around. I'll do like my house is set up so I can walk in this big circle through my living room and dining room and family room and kitchen and all this stuff. And I'll do this for days. I'm not kidding. And the first time I did it, I really, really thought that was it. I'm done. You know, years from now, I'm going to end up on a street corner with my Edgar in a brown paper bag, going, "I used to be somebody." Because I really had those moments where I'm like, "Oh God." And now I do it and everybody ignores me, because really what I'm doing is I'm just thinking of the next story. You know, I'm waiting for an idea to come or whatever. It's almost like when you get done running, you kind of walk around a little bit to cool down. That's basically what this process was. But at first I didn't know that. At first I thought, oh God, that's it. I've written 2 books, I'm finished. Well, listen, I've kept you guys for a long time listening to my ramblings, but again, I don't get out much anymore. So I thank you for coming. I thank you for listening. And I appreciate you having me so I could, you know, this is the first time I actually wore this shirt. I had it for almost a year. So, you know,
Thank you so much for coming by and speaking with us. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry, my screen was frozen. We have a book, we have a list of all of David's books at the library. It's printed off and it's in the entryway. So you can either come in to browse his books, or if you want to pick up that list and reserve some, you can reserve them, and we're still putting the books out for people in the vestibule if they prefer to pick them up without coming into the library. So thanks again, David. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, always a
Take care.
pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Take care, everybody.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.